Hello and welcome to Intimate Relationships. Over the next 6 weeks, I hope you learn a lot about not only how we study intimate relationships, but ways in which you can learn more about the relationships that are important to you. So if you signed up for a course to understand intimate relationships that end up like this, the bachelor choosing from several people that they try on to see who the perfect match is, you might be a little disappointed. But I will assure you, this is going to be a fun course. We'll learn a lot about how sociology and psychology play a role in helping us to understand what we do with people that we love. Now, I know The Bachelor can be a lot of fun, and so can Say Yes to the Dress and all these other types of things that involve romance. It's everywhere. But intimate relationships are not just about that person that you're trying to get to like you on Facebook or change your relationship on Facebook. It's also about your family, your friends, and how you communicate. It's also knowing yourself. What do you want? Who are you? How do you sexually identify? How are you attracted? How do you gender? How do you do life as a person who wants intimacy in it? Throughout this section, I will always, or throughout each one of these modules, I will point to a video that is downloaded with a URL so that you can watch full videos that I think are important. They're also going to have quiz questions over them. My very first one is from Soul Pancake, and it's What is Intimacy? And in the video, one of the important pieces that we learn is that for intimacy, we need vulnerability and curiosity. It's important for us to see couples, and you'll see this in the video, being vulnerable with each other and also being curious, asking questions. That's an important part of any relationship. First of all, think about when you're vulnerable with people. Who is it that you're most vulnerable with? Why? And have you ever been in a relationship where you were vulnerable, but you weren't necessarily interested in their life, their friends, their family? That often can cause issues with our sense of intimacy. This applies also to our friends and our family. We need to be vulnerable and curious about the lives around us. Is it done right? Not always. Even the smartest person in the world didn't have the greatest relationship. He was married, named Albert Einstein, by the way, for many years, but he was mostly attracted to his cousin, who was often involved and interested in the same types of things he was interested in. And so we can't always say that the smartest people in the world know exactly how to deal with intimate relationships, and especially the science behind it. Intimate relationships are defined in many ways. Although the book will point mostly to the fact that the most intimate relationship involves sexual attraction, there will be times that I will counter that. And I invite you to do the same thing. That's good science. But what we're going to study is what makes it a relationship intimate. And this applies to our family and friends. And then there is a sexual component that sometimes does enter into the process. First of all, people are intimate when they have interdependence, they're bidirectional, and they're unique. What does that mean? Well, first, the simple piece is that, like Roland Muller says, it's the us versus me. We take into consideration these people that are in our lives, and we want them to have value. And so when we make decisions, sometimes we consider more of an us than a me. Also, at times we consider ourselves. What do we want? And we're doing that sometimes for us, because nobody wants to live a life that somebody is prescribing you. So the most intimate relationships are usually people being fully aware of themselves and then sharing that in an us state. So what are these three things as far as they're defined? Interdependence is that mutual influence that two people have over one another. We have this with everybody. It's not just our close, intimate partners that we have. It's all social relationships. You need the person to drop off the mail. You need people to work at taking out viruses from your computer. You need people that are able to fix plumbing when it goes wrong. Those are all interdependent. Just like people need you for the special gifts and whatever you offer as far as friendships and personal citizenship, people need you for those things too. Bidirectionality is where it gets a little bit closer, where the relationship has some sort of operation where both people are putting in. When we're in personal relationships, we like to see some sort of reward from both sides. Not always will that be an equal sense of reward, but we have to recognize that both people or both groups are allowing themselves to be part of that relationship. Now, the closest of our relationships we often think of as unique. Think of your best friend. Why is it your best friend? What makes the one thing that's different with them, or the 1,000 things that are different with them compared to somebody that you wouldn't attach the word best to? So, unique relationships are something that when you identify that, you have a sense of intimacy with that person. Now, uniqueness is important, but I also think another piece is not mentioned in these three, but added in the book somewhere in the text, and that's that they're expected to be enduring. Assumptions that they will last a long amount of time. For example, some of your siblings and family members you've known for a while, but you may know a friend just as long. Or you expect a relationship, if it gets into a certain stage, to last a long time. So what types of relationships are we always involved in? Well, we would divide that into personal and impersonal, and we need both. A personal relationship is informal. It's at a deeper level, such as family, friends, and fictive kin, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Personal, you can usually tell it hits you in the gut. If somebody were hurt, or there was pain, or there was some sort of crisis, you would be there for that person. But you can also have close relationships that are personal, to where you may not be directly involved in that crisis and helping it, but you will have some sense of empathy. Types of family, for example, also help us understand the different levels of how close we are to people. For example, your family of orientation is the family you're born or adopted into. That's the people that have raised you. Now, it doesn't always end up being that that's the closest group that you're part of. Some people have no good relationship with their family. There may be abuse. There may have been lots of separation. And so there's certain things that you have to take in mind when you're looking at the family of orientation. But it is, in all intents and purposes, the place in which we learn our basic socialization. Our family of procreation is the family we make. It may be through marriage, partnering, parenthood, cohabiting for long periods of time. That family of procreation doesn't necessarily have to have kids. My husband and I have been married almost 26 years. We chose not to have children a long time ago. We were both pastors, and also as a teacher, I just didn't see the need. We knew there were 7.4 billion people in the world, and we just felt like we didn't need to add to that. However, we have as a title the word family of procreation because we could make a family if we chose. Fictive kin are those folks that are so close to you that those bonds are almost like family, and sometimes more intimate than even your biological family. And so fictive kin can play a really strong part in your relationships. The nuclear family is a family composed of adults and children. And so the difference between Mitch and I as family of procreation is that we don't necessarily have a nuclear family, even though we have a dog, and I would go ahead and say he's part of our nuclear family. And finally, there's your extended family. This might not be a personal relationship. This might be a little impersonal. They're family that I know that I've run into at funerals and weddings that I just have never met in my life. And so extended family can sometimes be very close, like grandparents, aunts, and uncles, but sometimes it can be very impersonal. And you're just related by blood. And that's why we look at impersonal as important, because there are people that we have less emotion and formal kind of ties. Sometimes it's task oriented. I tell people our impersonal relationships are often more important at times. For example, when a crisis happens, you need your neighbors around if the town is flooding to help you get sandbags out there or try to keep things from going down into the basement. Or if your plumbing in your apartment goes, you may not have ever talked to your neighbor before, but suddenly that person becomes very important in your life. We need these impersonal relationships because they allow us to get through certain things, especially like I've mentioned when crisis hits. So what's the difference between family and intimate relationships? Well, the one thing about super independence and bidirectional and uniqueness is that sexual component. There are some relationships for some people, And a large portion of the world expects people to have an intimate relationship that lasts a long time, but it's not always the norm. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. In our book, The Study of the Importance of Intimate Relationships, is that it's something that we see changes the outcome of certain feelings and experiences of people. For example, in 2006, Cohn, Schaefer, and Davidson did a study with people who were given MRI images in the brain, or looking at those MRI images. When participants believed that they would experience physical pain, they saw less of a threat to their physical danger. Oops, we'll go back here again, sorry. When they were holding the hand of somebody that they considered a partner in life. And even though they were comparing to people not holding anyone's hand or a stranger's hand, it was important for them to study how intimacy made a difference in the chemical reaction and the reactions of the people. The other thing to keep in mind is that it may feel different holding the parent of your mother or a sibling or a best friend as compared to holding the hand of a person that you consider an intimate partner. The second illustration that was in the book was also the mortality rate of cardiac patients who are in satisfying relationships with those who are in unsatisfying relationships. Just because you're in a sexual relationship with the person or attracted to them doesn't mean it's healthy, and it does not necessarily mean it's satisfying. We'll talk a little bit about the differences of abuse and how sometimes we can get ourselves into relationships that, as much as we may be attracted, may not necessarily be healthy. We can always make a difference in making every relationship we have happier and more healthy if we can. But there are some that can be very dangerous, and we'll have a couple times to talk about that later in the module. We study intimate relationships because they also are crucial for our survival as a species. Basically, we procreate. We need to have species continue, but it's not just about the biological piece. It's also because we need people in our lives. That mental and physical both go together. And so there are special needs, of course, of our basic survival that are needed, especially as we are young children. But there's also that sense of survival based on love and acceptance and a sense of being ourselves. Sexual desire and attraction are chemically based in the limbic system. We'll study a little bit about how the different hormones play a part and how we attach to people. But have you ever experienced that time when you didn't have that chemistry with the person? That's something that we have to recognize as well. There are a lot of times people are meant in all aspects of the world, it would seem like they would be meant to be together, but that chemistry is not working and it's not there. That happens in lots of ways. Doesn't mean that people can't have a relationship, especially if it's, something that they still feel is worth their time. But we will talk about the different levels of how sexual desire and attraction are something, and then also how on the other end we have opportunities just to be in relationship because it feels good despite the fact that we might not have chemistry. I'm going to say this. It's a lot of times, however, that we are not always being aware that people are attracted in the same ways. And we have to recognize the sexuality and gender spectrum and also recognize people who are asexual. But just because a person says they're asexual doesn't mean that they don't have a sense of intimacy. There's different levels. It's all on spectrums. The other important aspect is that in the last 20 years, we've really seen the acceptance of the sexuality and gender spectrum, and we are going to honor that in every sense of the word for this course. And so when we ask the questions about relationship, we're not going to just talk about heteronormative. We're going to talk about all the different ways in which people express their relationships of intimacy, and also to understand how those work in different levels with different people. I'd like you to take time to look at Dr. Helen Fisher's Science of Love and Attraction, found in Module 1. It's a little bit longer of a video, but it will be asked about on a quiz. It's important for us to keep in mind that this is a science that we're looking at. I think you'll enjoy all of her videos. She's really entertaining. But also you can do these lectures in two ways. You can go through the whole lecture without stopping. But if you have the other Canvas open, in another window, you can stop right now and watch those videos just like the other ones before, and then come back to the lecture. In the book, these are the way the different levels are presented. Once again, I make the special note that I struggle with the last section of intimacy only being related to what's sexual attraction. I think that that's something that the authors in their studies are emphasizing. But at the top, of course, we have interdependent relationships of all kinds, which is the people that we usually have, impersonal relationships along with personal relationships. The closer we get to our own selves and everyday lives, we'll have personal relationships. Sometimes that's with coworkers, friends, close relationships that are best friends, sometimes family or fictive kin, and intimate relationships that can involve long-term relationships that are both sexual and also just close to a point where you are completely vulnerable and curious, knowing that they are important to your life. I will often put in the videos and also in the slides that will be without the video presentation definitions, because you'll be able to come back for your quizzes to look up definitions and have open book access to these slides. So I don't want to have my video in the way, but sometimes when I've gone over a point, I will go ahead and put in that definition again so it can be easily found. Once again, interdependent relationships at the highest rank, personal relationships at the second level of closeness to you, close relationships that are often friends and do a lot of variety of activities with you, and finally intimate relationships that are the most close, which can have some kind of sexual passion but not necessarily always have to have sexual passion. So what do you want to know about intimate relationships? I'm going to remind you right now that in your your paper today, or that's due on Friday, I want to just overview a couple pages of what your intimate relationships are and how they affect your life. And I want you to continue to build on using your own relationships to analyze some of these theories that we're going to be going through. So how do we study intimate relationships? It is a science. It's not just advice. And so you can get advice from anybody. Heck, you can turn to a person right now that if you're in a room with and ask them advice about a relationship. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have a scientific background for that. That's okay. Sometimes they're completely correct with that advice. But what we're doing is looking at intimate relationships from a scientific perspective, using psychology, sociology, and other disciplines. So we have to ask questions about what it means to be intimate and how it works in society, how it works in our socialization. And there are three kinds of questions. First, there's descriptive questions: how it happens, what happens when we're in a relationship, what types of relationships, the prediction of when it's going to happen. Are you involved in a relationship that is puppy love? Is it something that is a best friend? When does it happen for you, as far as maybe looking into long-term relationships that do involve some sort of sexual attraction or romantic attraction? And finally, why does it happen? Why does the world set up the way we do, what love is, and how we do it? Let's look at that a little bit through the method of scientific relationships, or intimate relationship science, sorry. When we are looking at things, we will be learning some theories, and I want you in your final project to be able to use this operation that's in your book, but also on this page, so remember to come back to it. What's your theory about something that you might be studying for your final subject? For example, some people study hookup relationships. Maybe you might say there are some pros to having a unattached relationship that just involves sex, because it's important in life to be able to have that sexual gratification, but at the same time, no, you're not ready for something long term. I've had students do that as a project, and so they put a hypothesis out there. They do some interviews, or they do some research about how people have understood hookup relationships, and they'll say that I predict that a majority of people believe that there are as many pros as there are cons, and you can test that. Then you operationalize it what are the abstract concepts about what hookups are about, choose a measurement strategy, what is support or not support, design a study, and analyze that data. We'll go a little bit more through that with some of our collaborative sessions, and so don't be afraid of that whole method. We're just going to try it out. Once again, these questions are the things we ask along the way, but we also ask a couple things about our questions. First of all, are the questions we're asking about how relationships are done and how they're experienced and how people tend to express them or operate them. Is it testable, that question we're asking? Is it something that can be confirmed or disconfirmed by systemic observation? For example, when we're talking about hookups again, if we say we believe the majority of people think that it is also a pro to have hookup relationships as well as cons, well, how do you falsify that? What would be your thing that would not support that theory? That goes on to theory. We have to have a theory. What's the explanation of the phenomenon? Why is, for example, the hookup culture happening now? Why is it happening in such a large way? And why is it changing norms? And then we have to study some variables, aspects of the world that vary across individual time. So if we would have studied hookup culture in the 70s, some people would have called it more the sexual revolution. Some people would say, what's the difference between what happened in the 70s and what's happening today? And some people would put a variable in there of length of education. One reason people hook up is because they're getting married later. And one of the variables might be that education level might be something that explains that. We have to throw a hypothesis. What do we think is going to happen? A broad explanation that directs attention towards that particular variable or variables. For example, education level. So adding to that first theory or that first question, we could say, we believe that people with a higher education level have more positive outlook on hookups because they are not ready to enter into long-term relationships, and this serves a purpose as they're in the prime of their sexual activity, and as long as they keep it safe, they feel like it's a pro. Now, it's a very long hypothesis. It could be, obviously shorter, but that's what we're kind of talking about, is something that provides a broad explanation, something you could support or not support. Finally, you need to know that we're looking at this as a psychological construct. It's a product of the human mind. Not every culture has the same exact way in which we do love. Every society and societies make up their own rules, their norms, their regulations. In the United States, for example, we tend to be clothed all day and do a lot of our love attachment at night, not necessarily in the middle of a library, although that has been done before. But some parts of Africa, nobody wears clothes all day, and it's not sexualized. And sex might be something that happens at certain times. It still may be done at night. But it's created by each society. So you need to know that it's not imaginary. It's not something that's not without measure, but it's something that we make. And we have been changing those rules and norms for many years. And we're in the midst of a great change of rules and norms and regulations right now in the United States. And it's an exciting time to really be studying it. There are a few last things I want you to know as we see relationships operationalize. The translation of that abstract construct of, oh, what is love? Or, oh, what is an intimate relationship? We have to recognize how it operates. How do we act? What do we do about love? Is the bachelor the norm? Or what are the norms? What are the confines of our understanding of love? Can we replicate what we're looking at? Is it something that's not just something that happens to one person? Now, this is important because a lot of times, for example, and I give the example of male rape for this one, a lot of times we see people that are males that have been raped or assaulted, sexually assaulted, not report or try to even work at dealing with that. Because society sometimes has put this sense of emasculization on that norm, even though it is more prevalent than what we think. If one person thought that that was a unique experience, that they were sexually assaulted as a male, and then they saw that there was more and more people, if we did studies across the board, across states, maybe on college campuses, and we get to the statistic that 1 in 4 males are assaulted, whether on college or not, then suddenly we see a replication, and it helps us see what we act out and what we believe. And we as a society may say we have these social norms, but rape culture is pretty strong in certain areas, especially on campuses. So how do we see those replications being represented so we can see really what's going on? We also have to recognize the extent of our study and who we're studying, who's done the observing, and that reliability is really important in your research. Make sure to look. Now, I'm going to use some certain videos that may seem a little glitchy, and that's okay. I'm not using that for research example, but when it comes to your research project, make sure to use relationship science as your backdrop, sociology, psychology, and how that operalization, I'm so bad with that word, has occurred. Finally, as a group, we're going to observe relationships and intimate relationship science through social threading. We're going to each week have threads that are due by Wednesday night and have responses from the group. I'm also going to try to integrate with you on a couple times where we either have a collaboration session or a conference that I'll invite us to, and so please keep an eye out for that. We're going to be working on assignments and that final project, and then finally we'll keep returning to each other, hopefully at this lecture and also through the videos and just being online together. I'm really looking forward to the 6 weeks. I love teaching this subject. I hope you have a great day, and I hope you learn a lot in this week. Feel free to call me, contact information. That's my email address that you can copy there. And also, I'm a major texter, so give me a text if you have a question. Hope you have a great day.